Hi, I'm Lena with StudioR12. Thanks for joining me today for a creative moment. I'm going to be showing you how to use our product, the stencil, to create your perfect DIY project. I'll show you how to use the right kind of brushes and the right amount of paint so that you don't have bleeding underneath, and that way you can create something great every time. So with this board and this stencil, since they're different sizes, one of the things you can do to be sure they line up right is use a T-square. You're just going to lay your stencil, and then you're going to use the T-square on the edge of the board to line it up and make sure it's straight and in the middle. Once you get that taken care of, you're going to go for your tape. All you're going to need to do, if your stencil is larger than your board, is take two little pieces of tape here and you stick it over your lettering and just rub it down really good with your finger a couple of times. And that should keep it from moving around on you when you're working. Just like that, okay? The next thing you're gonna need, and this is really important, is a dome brush. So the dome keeps your stencil, or keeps your brush from pushing paint underneath your stencil, which will prevent bleeding. So what I like to do is get a paper towel, take my brush, and I just barely dip into my paint. So you're gonna get just a little bit on there, okay? And then the next step I like to do is take my brush and run it off that way. And that gets that big glob kind of off the end there. And then what we say is to swirl, okay? And this is pretty much the most important step. The less paint that's on your brush, the less likely you are to bleed underneath. Then you're gonna go to your board. And the way I like to do it is I like to swirl again. I just like to keep the motion that way. For me, that's more comfortable. Some people do prefer the stippling, but what I find sometimes is that can also create some bleeding just because you are creating such a motion that way with your paint, you can bleed underneath. Now, stenciling is a layers game. So what you're gonna see is after 1 to 2 layers, you're finally gonna be able to see what you're doing. I've done just 1 coat on the ME and 2 on the ELCO. Can you see that? But even still, just that little bit of paint on the ME is still visible once the stencil is removed. And since this stencil is not too large, I don't have to worry about moving my tape along my words. There you go. I think I can do 1 more coat on this, but I do want to let it dry before I go back and do that. So now that my stencil's been dried, I'm going to come back to it again. We dry them in between coats just to be sure we don't have too many brush marks. If you want to prevent that kind of look, just dry in between every layer, okay? The advantage to using a StudioR12 stencil is that it is laser cut, and you're not going to have, if you were to use like a vinyl or a decal, any of those frilly edges, as long as you use the proper stenciling techniques. One thing the stippling is really good for is if you've got a little spot that doesn't seem to be covering, like right here, I seem to not be sticking paint. That's a good time to use stippling. You can just kind of patch in. Now my W matches much better. And as soon as you're done, you can just go ahead and peel your stencil right off. You have a finished product. Thanks for joining me today for this StudioR12 creative moment. Happy stenciling!